The sandstorm came out of nowhere, a wall of heat and grit rolling across the crimson dunes of Oraxis IV. High above, a pair of suns scorched the sky, casting long shadows in the shattered rocks that jutted like broken teeth from the ground. In the silence between gusts, the sound of servos whirring, metal grinding, and boots crunching into the sand echoed faintly. Sergeant Cale Varn moved like a predator through the dust, low and calculated, his matte black armor cloaked in a shroud of particulate. He was a Deathworlder, born on Earth, forged in its endless crucibles, and hardened in more wars than he could remember. His armor was adorned with symbols that meant nothing to the aliens they fought, but everything to those who wore them. The skulls of fallen foes, etched into ceramic plates, reminders of survival earned, not given. Behind him, his team fanned out in a disciplined V formation, 6 of them, each a monster in human skin. Voss, the demolitions expert, carried enough firepower to level a crawler colony. Elin, the scout, moved almost without sound despite her heavy gear, eyes constantly flicking across sensor readouts. And then there was Merrick, the quietest of them all, a reaper in stealth plating, no more talkative than the ghosts they left behind. They weren't here for conquest or diplomacy. They were here because alien mercenaries had taken hostages, human ones, and no negotiation had worked. The Galactic Accord's laws had failed. Again. So the UEF had done what they always did when the rules crumbled. They had sent in Deathworlders. Cale crouched behind a slab of scorched rock, his HUD flickering as the storm passed. Ahead, half buried in the sand, sat the enemy's encampment, a makeshift base made from salvaged hulls and modular cargo rigs. Guard towers loomed like crooked sentinels, but Cale had seen better defenses on abandoned scrap worlds. He keyed the channel. Visual confirmed. Movement. Elan's voice crackled back, low and precise. For centuries. 2 Draviks, 1 car, 1 unknown. Patterns lazy. No patrol sync. Cale's mouth twitched in disdain. Alien mercs. Overconfident, soft-skinned. They thought Deathworlders were myths. Worse, some thought they were exaggerated. That was always their last mistake. "Engage on my mark," he said. "Quiet. No alerts." There was no affirmation, just silence. They understood. The first Draviks didn't see Voss coming. His neck shattered in a silent crunch before his body even hit the ground. Elan's shot took the car cleanly through both eyes, and Merrick handled the unknown with blade so sharp it never tore, only parted. The last sentry turned, mouth opening to cry out, but Cale's hand clamped over it a split second before the monoknife entered his ribs. Seconds passed. For bodies, for different races. All dead. No alarms. Cale wiped his blade on the sand. They moved again, deeper into the camp, where the stolen tech glowed dimly through canvas sheeting. Alien voices buzzed from a nearby tent, the harsh syllables of the Croft tongue. Cale had learned enough in blood-soaked trenches to understand one word repeated often: fear. They were talking about something that had killed 2 squads days earlier, something they now suspected was coming for them too. He allowed himself a grim smile. They weren't wrong. He turned to Merrick and pointed to the tent. Merrick vanished into shadow. Cale crouched again, scanning the feed from their orbital recon. The hostages were being held below the central rig, a reinforced cargo hold now buried into the sand. 2 access points, one likely rigged, the other a gamble. They'd need both speed and savagery. He keyed up. Form echo. Breach in 60. The others nodded, even as the air thickened with tension. Each one of them had come from places that had taught them the true value of seconds. Seconds could mean the difference between living and being vaporized in an airlock, between saving the innocent and recovering charred bones. At the mark, they moved. Elan tossed a flash disruptor to blind the perimeter sensors, while Voss made the first breach, his charges so precisely placed they barely made a whisper. Smoke rolled out from the breach. Inside, screams followed. Short, panicked. Then came the sounds of blades and bone. Cale led the charge. The aliens inside were armed but uncoordinated. They weren't soldiers, just paid killers and smugglers. They fired too late, too wide. Cale put a round to the nearest one's skull, his rifle spitting fire and death. Elin vaulted over a table, cutting down two with a curved blade. Merrick emerged from the back, soaked in someone else's blood. They cleared the upper floor in moments. No alarm still. The enemy hadn't anticipated the sheer speed of violence. That was the secret of Deathworlders. They didn't fight like armies. They fought like storms. Below, the central hold was locked. Voss went to work, fingers dancing over an alien keypad while his other hand rigged fail-safes. Behind the sealed door, Kale could hear muffled voices, human voices, frantic, alive. For minutes, Voss said, "Any faster," and its red pace inside. Kale nodded and turned to the others. Defensive arc. They'll know by now. He was right. Shouts echoed from the southern quadrant. Return fire hissed across the sand. Alien mercenaries poured from their quarters, some armored, some desperate. Voss stayed on the door. Elin and Merrick took point. Kale fired short, brutal bursts. Every shot a message. Then came the Brask. 8 feet of muscle and armor. The Brask was a tank with legs. They lumbered forward, plasma shields crackling, and behind them, the others rallied. This was their last stand. Kale dropped his rifle and drew the charge lance. It snapped to life in a burst of electric blue. He charged the lead Brask, dodging the first blow and driving the lance deep into its core. It shrieked and collapsed. The second one roared and charged. Too slow. Elin slipped under it and gutted it from behind. The battle was chaos, quick and merciless. Then, with a hiss, the lock disengaged. Doors open. Voss called. Kale rushed in, the dim lights illuminating the frightened faces of 12 humans, miners, engineers, a child gripping her mother's jumpsuit. "You're safe now," he said, voice calm despite the blood still dripping from his armor. "Move. Quickly." They led the hostages out under fire, covering every angle, precision slicing through panic. Merrick took a graze to the shoulder. Voss had blood on his brow. But they moved like clockwork, like Deathworlders. By the time the evac dropship arrived, the camp was burning. Alien bodies littered the sand. The few survivors had fled into the rocks, their courage broken. As the ship lifted off, Kale stood at the ramp, watching the camp recede. He'd seen this scene a dozen times, maybe more. The scorched earth, the silence after the violence, the ghosts. He turned to Elin. "How long until they send another team?" She shrugged. "Depend how long it takes the next Merc group to forget why we're feared." Kale's gaze returned to the burning sands. "They always forget. But not for long. Not after this." The wind on Valtor Prime smelled of metal and ozone, a stench that never faded. Here, in the underbelly of one of the galaxy's largest scrapyard moons, combat wasn't a matter of strategy. It was survival boiled down to seconds and instinct. Sergeant Kale Varn crouched on a scaffolding ledge, watching as cargo mechs hauled rusted wreckage across the field below. The air shimmered from reactor exhausts, and in the haze he saw them, Drask Syndicate scouts. 6, maybe 7. No insignia, no standard gear. Mercenaries. Kale's eyes narrowed behind the visor. Their presence meant one thing. A raid was imminent. Somewhere beneath their feet, a UEF tech vault, buried under false registries and hidden in this industrial graveyard, was about to be hit. The vault wasn't just valuable. It was home to classified neural architecture that couldn't fall into alien hands. Or worse, get reverse engineered. Behind him, the squad gathered in silence. Voss checked the kinetic detonators strapped across his chest, methodical and unhurried. Merrick stood still as stone, already synced to the vault's underground blueprints, his eyes scanning through layers of rusted girders and rock. Elin knelt beside Kale. Twin blade sheathed at her back, her breath steady despite the tension. "ETA on breach?" Kale asked, voice low. 17 minutes, Merrick replied. "They've already marked the tunnel seams. They know exactly where to cut." Kale considered it. The Syndicate had inside information, no doubt. That narrowed the options. A direct defense was suicide. They were outnumbered and operating without reinforcements. But Deathworlder special forces were never trained to hold the line. They were trained to end threats with surgical violence. He stood and slung his rifle across his shoulder. We take the tunnel first. Force them to adapt. Elin cracked a rare smile. We're very good at making them panic. They move fast, using old maintenance routes Kale had memorized years ago. The corridors were tight, lit by the flicker of failing overheads. Somewhere above, the surface mechs howled like dying machines, drowning out the subtle footfalls of the squad. Kale's mind ran the possibilities. These syndicate mercs weren't like the amateurs back on Varaxis 4. They moved in formation, carried high-end weapons smuggled from the Zethar black markets. They even used squad designations in coded bursts, indicating training discipline. This wasn't an ordinary heist. At the mouth of the vault tunnel, they split. Elin vanished into the shadows on the flanking scaffolds. Merrick slid into a nearby data conduit, patching into the defense subroutines. Voss stayed close, placing timed charges along the ceiling supports. Kale peered into the long, sloped corridor where the mercs would enter. It was narrow, barely wide enough for two to walk shoulder to shoulder. Perfect, set for convergence. Kale ordered. One-way trap. No egress. He felt the familiar edge settle over him. Not nerves, not excitement. It was a clarity of purpose that came only in moments where hesitation meant death. The Deathworlder edge. When your body didn't waste a single twitch. When your breath was a weapon and your heartbeat a war drum. The first merc broke into the corridor 5 minutes later. Drask armor, standard loadout, pulse rifle, grab boots, neural dampeners. He made it 10 steps before Merrick dropped from the ceiling like a specter and severed the man's spinal stack with a single clean motion. The body didn't even hit the ground before the others followed. Shouts in their guttural tongue, weapons raised. Kale stepped from the shadows and opened fire. His shots were exact. One through the knee of a charging Velik. Another clean through the optic lobe of a Zarn scout. Voss's charges detonated behind them, sending rubble crashing down and sealing the exit. Screams echoed. The corridor became chaos. Elin moved like flowing smoke. Blades flashed in arcs too fast for the eye to follow. Blood, thick and violet, sprayed across the walls. Merrick engaged the heaviest of them. 2 brand slavers with plasma axes. They fought hard, fought like veterans. Merrick killed them both in under 20 seconds. Then there was silence. Kale stepped over the bodies, boots crunching on fragments of armor and bone. He knelt by one of the fallen, an officer by the insignia etched into his vambrace. The merc's eyes fluttered. Dying. Fast. Kale leaned in. Who sent you? The merc spat blood and growled. You're too late. They're already in the vault. Kale's head tilted. No, you were the distraction. A cold realization struck. This raid wasn't about the vault. It was about keeping them away from something bigger. He activated his comms. New priority. Cross-check all regional scans. Look for secondary access points. And find me what they're hiding. Merrick spoke instantly. A subgrid pulse just went active 60 meters north. It's not part of our vault systems. Move, Kale said. They emerged into an auxiliary shaft built into the refuse slope. Hidden under layers of slag and collapsed decking was a tunnel that hadn't seen use in decades. The trail was recent, disturbed metal dust, displaced grates. Whoever they were chasing was down here, and they were careful as they descended. The temperature dropped. Kale felt the walls vibrating with a low hum, powerful, unstable. The mercs weren't just here to loot. They were here to extract something dangerous. The tunnel opened into a chamber unlike anything Kale expected. It was circular, lined with columns pulsing with unfamiliar light. In the center stood a pod, half buried in machinery, and surrounded by strange glyphs glowing in a rhythmic pulse. Elin's breath caught. This isn't UEF tech. Kale stepped forward. The pod's outer shell was cracked, leaking a blue mist that evaporated as it touched the air. Inside, barely visible through the distortion, was a humanoid figure. Pale, hooked into tubes and neural lines. Alive. Merrick ran a scan. Human DNA, but heavily altered. This isn't storage. It's containment. Kale's gut twisted. Whatever this was, it wasn't a victim. It was a weapon. One left here long ago, forgotten or buried by design. Did the syndicate know? Voss asked. Kale shook his head. Doesn't matter. Someone does now. Behind them, footsteps. Dozens. They followed us, Elin said. Kale turned, weapon raised. Then we buried them with it. The firefight in the containment chamber was like nothing they'd faced. These weren't just mercenaries. They were enhanced. Some with subdermal plating, others moving like they had speed enhancers burned into their bones. But enhancements didn't erase fear, and the Deathworlders thrived on fear. Elin held the left flank, cutting down anything that stepped to the arch Merrick fought in silence, moving through shadows and striking with mechanical grace. Voss collapsed the far column with a grenade, pinning half the enemy squad under rubble. Kale held the center, the pulse of the alien pod at his back. He fought like a man who had nothing left to prove, each motion refined through decades of violence. When the last merc fell, gurgling and twitching, he stood over the body, breath steady. They were still alive. For now, Kale turned back to the pod. The mist had thickened. The figure inside twitched. Is it waking up? Elin asked. No, Kale said. It's responding. They didn't know what it was, but someone wanted it, badly, and that meant Kale and his squad would make sure it never left Deathworlder hands alive. Seal the chamber. We're not done. The chamber's silence felt heavier than the firefight that had preceded it. Dim blue light from the pod's glyphs painted eerie patterns on the squad's armor, illuminating tense expressions and blood-slick plating. The atmosphere carried a hum that crawled along Kale's nerves, a resonance that bypassed auditory senses and pulsed somewhere deep in the base of the skull. Whatever was inside that pod, human or not, it wasn't dormant anymore. Elin crouched near the control pylon, studying the alien interface with cautious eyes. This system's not just power and containment. It's communicating, or at least trying to. Voss paced a slow perimeter, sweeping his weapon across the shattered entry points. We got 12 bodies in here, and no guarantee they were the last. You want to talk to the thing now? Kale didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on a humanoid inside the pod, barely visible through the condensation fog glass. Slender, motionless, but its chest rose now, faint and rhythmic. A heart had started beating. We hold position, Kale said finally. We learn what we can. Then we destroy it if we have to. Merrick tapped into the pylon with a neural link, grimacing a static flare across his visor. It's not one system. There are layers, redundant controls stacked on top of something, older. The vault above was just a mask. This is a relay chamber, designed to send something out, not hold it in. Kale turned sharply. Out where? Merrick hesitated, then rotated a holographic projection into view. Star charts. Dozens of systems lit in red. Most were uninhabited zones. Dead sectors. Places even pirates didn't go. Those coordinates, Merrick continued, match recorded disappearances. Ships that went off course. Colonies that lost contact and never resurfaced. Whatever this thing is, it's linked to them. Elin straightened, eyes hard. Then why bring it here? Voss stopped pacing. Because Valtor Prime is off-grid. Perfect place to wake up something the universe once forgotten. Kale stepped toward the pod, the hum growing louder. Beneath the translucent shell, the humanoid twitched again. Its skin bore markings, circuit-like patterns etched in silver, pulsing faintly. Not tattoos. Not natural. Something integrated. A flicker. Its eyes opened. They were solid black, starless voids that reflected nothing. The squad tensed, weapons aimed. Kale held up a hand. Don't shoot. The humanoid, no, entity, sat up slowly, pulling free of the tubes. No resistance, as if it had waited for permission. Its gaze passed over them, unblinking, unafraid. Then it spoke, not in words, but through direct neural resonance. A wave of impressions, images, memories that weren't their own. A planet consumed by storms. A civilization choking on its own machines. A decision, drastic and final, to preserve a weapon capable of outlasting time. Voss staggered back, pressing a hand to his head. What the hell? They weren't trying to kill us, Elin said quietly. They were trying to warn us. Kale focused on images. The entity showed a map, a convergence point, deep space, alien fleets, not Drask, not even Syndicate, something older, hungrier. The weapon wasn't meant for conquest. It was a failsafe, but someone wanted to use it anyway. Whatever these mercs were doing, Kale said, it wasn't freelance work. They were trying to extract it for a client. Someone who knew how to manipulate ancient tech. Someone who doesn't fear what's coming. Merrick traced the signals again. That pulse we detected before, it wasn't an activation. It was a beacon. The moment they breached the outer vault, it sent a signal. Out there, Kale felt his stomach twist. How far did it reach? Too far, Merrick muttered. The entity stood now, naked and dripping with condensation, but utterly unshaken. When it moved, the air displaced around it like ripples in a gravitational well. It stared at Kale, the way a biologist might observe a particularly defiant insect. Kale stared back. You were designed to fight something worse than us. You were never meant to survive this long. Another pulse. This time it wasn't mental, it was environmental. Lights flickered. Stone groaned. The chamber shuddered like something massive had stirred below. Underground seismic activity, Merrick reported, localized and rhythmic. Elan's voice was sharp. Something's waking up with it. Extraction route? Kale snapped. Back through the shaft, but it's unstable, Voss answered. And if that signal drew reinforcements? It will, Kale interrupted. We go now. The entity followed without being told. Not a prisoner. Not an ally. Something in between. A loaded weapon walking under its own power. The shaft was darker now. The emergency lights dimmed to flickering embers. Echoes bounced in unnatural patterns. Kale took point, Elan and Merrick on the flanks, Voss rear. As they moved, Kale radioed UEF command, sending a tight beam burst through encrypted frequencies. Location. Encounter summary. Immediate threat level. Omega tier. He knew it might be too late. 2 levels above, just before reaching the surface, they ran into resistance. But not Syndicate. These were in full armor. Black plating. No visible faction. Precision weapons. Tactics tight and aggressive. They're not here to contain it, Elan shouted, ducking behind a support beam. They're here to escort it. Kale dug behind cover, snapping off a shot that tore through one attacker's helmet. Inside was something pale and unfamiliar. Humanoid but wrong. No breath. No blood. A construct. Merrick overrode a side door and opened an alternate path. This way leads to the east landing pads. They fell back in formation, pushing toward the exit. The entity moved without hesitation, not running, not ducking, almost like it knew nothing could hurt it, or it no longer cared. Kale slid across the final corridor and kicked open the bulkhead. Outside, the dawn cast long shadows over the scrapyard. Fires burned where the first battle had begun. But a small shuttle remained intact, buried under slag but functional. We'll take it and fly low, Kale said. No uplinks. No beacons. Ghost mode. Elan climbed into the cockpit, activating the systems. Merrick set up a perimeter while Voss kept an eye on the entity, now seated calmly in the center of the hold like a patient awaiting surgery. As the engines roared to life, Kale looked back once more. Behind them, the chamber had gone silent again, but the beacon's echo still rang in his mind. Something was coming, and the galaxy, once vast and chaotic, suddenly felt far too small. The shuttle cut low across Valtor Prime's atmosphere, skimming the skeletal remains of long-dead war machines. Rusted turrets and collapsed hulls stretched across the horizon like grave markers in a forgotten battlefield. Inside the cockpit, Elan guided the ship with surgical precision, weaving between slag towers and ion debris. No comms, no NAV beacon, just analog flight and dead reckoning. Kale stood in the rear compartment, watching the entity as it sat motionless in the corner, still as stone. It hadn't spoken, not verbally, not telepathically, since they escaped the vault. Its black eyes remained fixed ahead, unblinking, as if seeing through metal and distance and time itself. Despite the calm, Kale could feel like a hum behind his sternum. Something watching even while dormant. Fuel won't last more than another hour, Voss said, checking gauges. If we don't find somewhere to set down, we'll fall out of the sky with style. There's an old UEF outpost about 70 clicks north, Merrick added, sifting through local memory archives. Cold storage, off-grid, no comm links. Might still have power cells. Plot a course, Cale said. The shuttle banked northeast, disappearing into a corridor of rust storms and magnetic interference. As they flew, Cale reviewed what little they had. A forgotten alien weapon, a dead civilization's failsafe, and an unknown client with the power to coordinate mercenaries, fabricate constructs, and launch a strike into a restricted sector, all for something buried for centuries. It wasn't about the weapon. It was about what it could signal. The UEF outpost loomed out of haze like a rusted skeleton half swallowed by the dunes. Its main tower leaned at an angle, crumpled by some past orbital debris strike. But the landing pads were mostly intact, and power still hummed faintly in the subsystems. Elon brought them down in a controlled descent, the shuttle coughing into idle silence. They disembarked quickly. Cale signaled Voss and Merrick to sweep the perimeter, while he and Elon guided the entity into the outpost command module. The inside stank of oil and mold, but the systems were functional, barely. Merrick patched in to isolate the base from any outbound pings. No transmissions would betray their location. Elon motioned to the sealed cryo chamber beneath the command deck. We could isolate it down there. Reinforced, temperature controlled. Keep it unconscious, or at least contained. Cale hesitated. It hasn't attacked. It hasn't resisted. Might be more useful awake. Useful isn't the same as safe, she replied. He didn't argue. But something inside him refused to lock it away again. Not without understanding. For all its inhuman features, the entity radiated a presence that pulled at him. It was a relic of war, yes, but maybe also a witness. Maybe it had seen what waited in those dead sectors beyond mapped space. That night, the wind howled outside the outpost, and Cale stood guard beside the entity while the others took shifts. The temperature dropped to sub-zero, the generator rattled in protest, and static flared occasionally across the comm panels. He couldn't sleep, not with the weight of the future sitting across from him. At some point, maybe after midnight, maybe before, he felt again that ripple of resonance. Thoughts not his own, threading into his mind like a whisper. You fear what you must become. Cale didn't flinch. I've already become it. The entity tilted its head, as if studying him anew. You fight for survival, for victory. But that is not why you were chosen. I wasn't chosen. You were forged. Deathworlders are not born. They are made in conflict. Your kind endures the intolerable. You outlive extinction. Cale narrowed his eyes. That's not a compliment. It is a warning. The ones who come will not break. They will consume. And only your kind will wound them. Not stop, but wound. That is why I woke. Cale leaned forward. Then tell me who they are. The entity's eyes flared with the faintest shimmer, not of light, but of memory. They have no name in your tongue. Once, they seeded galaxies with life to feed their own. Then they fell silent, hibernating between stellar eras. The beacon has awakened a fragment. More will follow. He stared. So the Syndicate was trying to use you against them. No, the Syndicate were pawns. The true hand belongs to something worse. A species that believes it can master the threat. They will unleash it instead. Cale stood. He had what he needed. The UEF wouldn't believe it, not at first, but Command could be convinced with proof. But more importantly, preparation had to begin now. The Special Forces weren't just a strike arm anymore. They would be the first, the only viable resistance when the storm came. The following morning, Merrick found an encrypted packet buried in the outpost archives, transmitted days before the Syndicate raid. Cale decrypted it slowly, recognition dawning, as the origin point blinked on the screen. High orbit. UEF Command Vessel Arclancer. They knew. Someone in the upper chain had known what lay buried on Valtor Prime and left it there. Perhaps to be forgotten. Perhaps to be claimed. Perhaps because they couldn't decide which was worse, hiding it or facing it. Cale sent a command signal that activated a recall beacon for Deathworlder Special Forces units in deep ops sectors. Short-range, secure burst. No coordinates. Just one phrase. Prepare for extinction-level contingency. They left the outpost an hour later. The shuttle, patched with field repairs, struggled to ascend but made orbit as they broke atmosphere. Elin glanced back at the entity, who stared through the hull as though the stars themselves whispered to it. "Where do we go?" she asked. Kale didn't hesitate. "We go where the next signal might land. We intercept it. We keep this thing from falling into anyone's hands. And if it wakes fully?" Kale looked at the black-eyed figure. "Then we find out if a weapon can choose not to be won." As stars unfolded ahead and the quiet of space swallowed the last echoes of Valtor Prime, Kale knew this was only the beginning, because Deathworlders didn't run from fear. They hunted it,